I'd like to thank the guys at Audio Sanctuary in New Malden, London for lending me their display unit of the Audeze LCD-2 for a review. Check them out in the link in the description, and do visit their brick and mortar outlet if you're in the area for a terrific selection of high-end headphones and speakers. Hello everyone and welcome to another review. This time let's talk about the Audeze LCD-2 pair of planar magnetic headphones. And let's go straight into the build quality. Now this particular LCD-2 weighs 548 grams, and I have to admit I haven't felt this level of discomfort from wearing a headphone since my HiFiMan HD800 in the stock configuration. I'm just talking about how it comes out of the box, or how I've perceived it without any modifications to it. I believe that it's not just because of the weight that does this, because my ZMF Eikon is over 600 grams of weight, and my ZMF Atticus is only 2 grams of weight less than the Audeze LCD-2 that I have here. But it has to do more with how the weight is distributed. I do believe that the weight distribution on this is not stellar. I know that some people go for something called a lobe strap, which is kind of like the buffalo pad that comes on ZMF headphones. And some people even shout out a bit more. A very nice carbon fiber and a strap on top, which has a better weight distribution in my opinion. And some people buy that and implement it on this. But that's an extra 200, which is a good chunk of the full price of this headphone. About, I would say, 20% of the MSRP. So that would be up to you. If you can get a good used deal on that, on this, and then you want to get one of those, by all means go for it. But I do think that the quality of the build quality in terms of the weight distribution in stock configuration is not that great. So this is also the first full-size headphone that I've encountered in a while where I have to completely maximize the headband adjuster to be as loose as possible. As for the build quality itself, it seems quite sturdy in the hands, with the wooden cups standing out in a fetching manner. However, I do feel that the joints that connect the frame to the cup is a bit of a weak point, with a creaking and snapping whenever I open it to put it on or take it off. But that could just be because this is a display unit and it has been used and abused quite a bit, I would assume, from people who visit the store. But I have heard that this happens with other units as well, so take that as you will. The headphones use the same 4-pin mini XLR connectors that all LCD series do. I really like these connectors, by the way, because I used to not quite understand them when I was new at this whole thing. But now I kind of see their point. They're very sturdy. They don't come out of place. They snap in, and you have to press the little button on the side to pull them out. And you really don't have problems with them like coming out prematurely or something, as you would with, let's say, a 3.5mm connector. Very sturdy. I do agree with Audeze's choice to use these, but I don't quite understand why they have it so they have it jutting out from the front instead of it hanging straight down off the sides. They have this little enclave which has it pointing up towards the front, but I guess it's a design choice that Audeze is a bit unique with for that reason, because I don't see it with any other headphone manufacturer. The headband has very little padding. In my opinion, could you greatly benefit from the use of a strap. Like I said earlier, this really does need some adjustment, for me at least, when it comes to comfort. So let's get into the sound. The Audeze LCD-2 is quite the friendly headphone, so it injects a really warm sound into whatever music you're listening to, but not one that's quite overbearing. I do believe that this is a difference between this model, which is a 2016 phaser model, and the pre-phaser models of the years past, which I believe to be quite a bit warmer. I know some people prefer those, but I do believe after listening to this that I would not prefer those over this, because this has a more snappy sound, but I'll get into that. The soundstage is quite intimate, but it doesn't feel too stifling, and the imaging is quite adequate, making do with the space available in impressive fashion. But it's not going to be anything you consider wide. I do believe my ZMF headphones have a wider soundstage, even though those are closed, and this is an open headphone, so keep that in mind. I would actually compare the soundstage in wideness to something like the Focal Elear or the HiFiMan HD800i, or maybe just slightly wider than the HD650 by Sennheiser. So on the topic of warmth, This headphone is not harsh at all. It's not supremely airy like the HD800 by Sennheiser, and it's not a bass cannon like the Fostex THX100, but I hear a sense of comfortable clarity throughout the headphone, but not one where I might get the sense that the headphones are, some might get the sense that the headphones are kind of veiled due to this. I find such a characteristic quite in line with the Audeze LCD series in general, with the LCD-3 kind of being the most dynamic sounding with the most treble presence out of them all. But the LCD-4 is kind of like a more refined and powerful version of the LCD-2. The same kind of warmth, same kind of slightly veiled sound, but very lush in the mid-range. So I'm told the bass of the LCD-2 is one of the areas that's morphed considerably since the earlier units from the past years. The clarity and dynamics of the headphones will kind of increase at the cost of some of the sub-bass extension. Once again, I've not heard the original LCD phaser models. I've only heard this 2016 one, but I have heard that some people prefer this one to the earlier ones for this reason, because there's more dynamics, there's more sense of a snappy open sound rather than a very rolled off warm sound that it used to have. Even though the sub bass has been reduced a little bit, I do find it to be more than adequate on the 2016 version. It doesn't feel like it's lacking. It extends decently low, but it doesn't have an immensely controlled nature. It's not particularly fast either. It just has a really nice full sound, which sends the whole headphone in kind of like a very slightly bassy but very warm in the mid-range kind of tone. But I do find the speed of the bass decent enough to keep up the transients of double bass drums, but not if you're listening to something like Slayer. Something like that. Overall, I found the low end to have the sub bass and mid bass amount to make this an effective all-rounder for listeners, definitely within reason. What's left as a deciding factor now is to talk about the other frequencies. The mid-range of the LCD-2 is smooth. It's not entirely liquid in nature like the HiFiMan HD800, but possessing a level of soft clarity that makes vocals have body and presence. It should be noted that although the mid-range performance of the LCD-2 as a whole is smooth, it doesn't lack in detail or anything, nor is it completely rolled off in air. I can confirm that to my ears the transition between the bass and the mid-range is actually quite transparent and clean. The bloom in the lower mid-range is minimal, but what exists, serves to heighten the character of warmth that these headphones possess. Male vocals are really good on these, even gritty and guttural vocal tones, bringing out clearly with the body and edge needed. The upper mid-range is a bit dipped, but not drastically dipped like the Focal Elear, meaning that while female vocals may sound a little further away than the male vocals, they don't sound thin or tonally off. I have to praise this headphone for being as forgiving as it is with some genres of music and recordings. A reference point that I have is an album which I think is mixed quite horribly. It's the Master of Puppets album by Metallica. It's kind of the whole guitar tone, it's a metal album. The guitar tone throughout is a bit scooped in the mids. It has a very mid-bassy sound overall, which kind of makes a lot of high-end headphones fall on their face because they're we don't really know what to do with this album. It's mixed so strangely. I'm glad to say that out of all the headphones that I have currently, the best two that handle this album, first of all, by far, is the Focal Elear, and then secondly, it's this headphone. Of the ones that I've tested in my the last headphone I think that I had which did as well as this was probably the HiFiMan HD800, which is also another very nice metal headphone, but a lot faster in the transients than the LCD-2. The treble of the LCD-2 has a nice amount of air around it, making cymbals pop a fair amount and injecting a sense of slight snappiness to the overall sound. High strings like violins and wind instruments, like tenor saxophone and all that, they sound quite well represented, but they're not overly airy or shrill like sometimes on the HD800, but they maintain a good sense of tonal balance and depth. Again, I'm told that the treble characteristics of the LCD-2 2016 iteration is because of the phaser driver innovation, plus a reduction of a more bloated low end, making the headphone possess more micro detail than before. So, even without the pre-phaser unit to compare, I must admit that I do like this change because while I do appreciate a sweet, dynamic but warm sound, I would not have wanted the LCD-2 to sound laggy. Being laid back and chilled out is It's a nice characteristic for some headphones to have as part of their personality, but being laggy, that is something you want to avoid if you are a headphone manufacturer. So overall, besides being warm, the LCD-2 feels like a very wet headphone, in stark contrast to the dry and analytical likes of the HD800, or even the less dry but still starker ZMF Eikon. I find the headphone very enjoyable to listen to with a multitude of genres, but never really edging out any of my other headphones in anything in particular. It has shimmering detail with the ZMF Atticus is a little glossed over, but it has less aggression and shout than the Focal Elear. It kind of sounds like it uses a wall of reverb to its advantage, making all music listened to on it take on the Audeze house sound that I have heard in other headphones in the same lineup, but for a price that could be considered entry level to their lineup. So let's talk about amp pairings. So based on this, how this sounded from my Warm and Syrupy Liquid Carbon by Cavalli, I would not recommend that for this or a similar amplifier for it. I believe it's a little too warm. Unless you really want to, I guess, pursue the sound characteristic that the pre-phaser models have. Like, once again, I haven't heard those, so I'm not sure. But I would want something a little more snappier to it. I personally, from the stuff that I have currently, I like using it with the amp section of the Audio GD NFB28, which is a very powerful amplifier, but a very neutral kind of amplifier. I run it through my Shed Gungner multibit into that, so I don't use the DAC on the NFB28 itself, but I like using the Gungner multibit as a DAC. I like using this as an amp primarily, and for this I believe it's a very, very good pairing. It has a very nice control of the bass, as much as I believe it can be done on this headphone. But I could be wrong there, I'm just talking about the gear that I have currently. Also, as it's a planar magnetic headphone, it does require a decent amount of power to drive, something that should be considered when you're selecting an amp for it. Let's talk about genre pairings. Now, as an all-rounder, the LCD-2 is firmly in that jack-of-all-trades section for its price range. So ironically, it's able to handle more genres of music than my other headphones, except for the Focal Elear, which is another all-rounder if you're a fan of its sound signature. From jazz to classical, metal to pop, the LCD-2 envelops music with its own characteristic and presents a very pleasant listening experience that has a lot of body due to the low end. I do think that electronic music might be a little lacking on this headphone though. It kind of lacks the bass slam of something like the Fostex TH600 or the ZMF Atticus, but it's not thin sounding like the HD800 in this regard. Bass guitars in general fall right into the range that is well represented by the low end of the LCD-2, but they don't have the sharp and precise nature of the HD800, and I could continue down that path if needed and make more comparisons like that, but I just gotta say this is a really nice sounding headphone, and definitely one you can expect consistent performance with if you like how it sounds generally, because it'll make any genre of music sound like itself. So into the headphone pairings. Now that I've talked about the HD800 so much, let's dive a little deeper into the comparisons between the two, because they are pretty much the same price if you're looking at MSRP these days. So the former Sennheiser flagship is firmly placed in the drier and more analytical side of things. When it comes to headphones in this price range, it pairs extremely well with the Cavalli Liquid Carbon, which I don't find the LCD to do quite as well. But it's quite a picky headphone in general to pair with amplifiers, which because of its 6K treble peak, it's really bright, and some even on neutral amplifiers to me kind of sounds thin and shrill to me sometimes. So I have to be very careful what I pair it with. That's why I like the Cavalli Liquid Carbon for it. Kind of dampens that. The LCD-2, however, I do believe would sound more like itself from more amplifiers. So another thing that should be remembered is that the HD800 has by far the widest soundstage and most precise imaging out of all the headphones that I'm going to be talking about in this video. So switching from the LCD-2 to the HD800, I have to admit you kind of feel like the floor has fallen in a bit, because that's how noticeable the absence of the Audeze's low end is from A to B. You also miss a warmth in the mid-range, removing a lot of the body from vocals and guitars alike. I would not call the HD800 a V-shaped headphone, but it definitely sounds a little recessed in the mid-range compared to the Audeze. What it outright wins at, however, and Sennheiser gets the gold medal in this, is the reproduction of detail. So this is a solid choice for a reference headphone, and the HD800 is quite brutally honest and exposes poorly mastered recordings to the listener. So whether if it's in highlighting recording faults or just becoming really bad sounding when it comes to badly mastered music. So the LCD-2 is way more welcoming of all genres, you know, like particularly like the Master of Puppets album by Metallica that I mentioned earlier, which sounds like the guitars are distant on the HD800, while the drums and cymbals are thin and piercing, which is not a very pleasant sound. The LCD-2 does quite a bit better than that. The HD800 is considerably lighter than the LCD-2, by the way, with this one coming up to about 371 grams compared to the Audeze's 548 grams. The ZMF Atticus. So switching between the LCD-2 to the Atticus is revealing of just how much in the 2016 model anyway. The LCD-2 emphasizes the availability of the shimmering detail hidden in the treble. Phrasing it like this will kind of make you think that the Atticus is not that detailed, which isn't quite the case. It just has more of a slightly glossy appearance, depending what you pair it with, because I recently tried the shit Valhalla 2 amplifier with it, and that really does a good job with like bringing out the detail more than definitely the Quality Liquid Carbon, which I wouldn't recommend with that, and the NOV28, even that amp section. Something a little more lean, I believe, does a great job with the Atticus. But back on topic, what the Atticus does have that the Audeze LCD-2 doesn't is that it has a lot of bass. And it's not just bass, it's slamming bass. It doesn't shy away from the electronic genres that the Audeze might be a tad laid back for, and it certainly does not mind introducing hefty low end into just about any recording. But once again, let's talk about Master of Puppets by Metallica, and I must admit the Atticus suffers on this album. It's too mid-bassy as a mix for the Atticus to handle it properly, because it falls squarely into where the Atticus likes to emphasize, so the whole thing sounds kind of a little muddy to me. Where the Atticus does hit back hard against the LCD-2 is with electronic pop music, bass slam and smooth mid-range going hand in hand to showcase the headphone's energetic nature. The Atticus is just a more awake experience than the LCD-2, which is a little veiled by comparison and more laid back. But the LCD-2, however, is able to work with more genres in my opinion, due to its less bassy nature. One area in particular that the LCD-2 is able to succeed compared to the Atticus is in older and warmer recordings, such as those by Led Zeppelin. It does really well with the guitars, both electric and acoustic, while the Atticus relies on the mix and can sound a bit overwhelmed with such pairings, as Led Zeppelin are from an era without snazzy modern production. So to sum up this comparison, the Cherry Atticus that I have right now is 546 grams, while the LCD-2 is at 548 grams. The Elear's Take No Prisoners sound, consisting of fantastic dynamics and speed among other aspects, puts it directly across the aisle from the laid-back and smooth LCD-2. So both these headphones are what I would consider all-rounders, meaning if you're a fan of their sound signature, pretty much any genre will sound good to you. With the Elear, I prefer hard rock, metal, and electronic genres, while smooth jazz, classical, and live recordings sound better to me on the LCD-2. The mid-range of the Elear is also aggressive and a bit shouty, while the LCD-2 simply just isn't. So the Elear has a snappier sound to my ears, possibly due to a sudden upturn at the 9K, 10K treble area, after a considerable dip before that, so it kind of makes it like a sudden jump, which makes cymbals and snare drums hit quite hard. Grand pianos, in my opinion, are also very tonally superior and more realistic sounding on the Elear, and as an extension, the Utopia further up the chain. Vocal reproduction, both male and female, are handled better by the LCD-2, however. Ultimately, I gotta say, it comes down to preferences. I would not recommend the Elear if you want something for easy listening or are looking to relax, whereas the LCD just fits perfectly into that scenario. So my Elear weighs 448 grams, while the LCD-2 weighs 548 grams. The weight distribution, I gotta admit, is handled far better on the Elear, with a very comfortable it's a very comfortable headphone with its headband, padding and soft air pads. I wasn't going to originally compare these two headphones, but I have been asked this quite a few times on Reddit, so here I go. The ZMF Eikon Padauk wood, which is $1,400 compared to the LCD-2. Now the first thing about this comparison that doesn't seem quite right to me is the MSRP is okay, $1,000 to $1,400. Okay, fine, $400. But you can get an LCD-2 on sale for like $700. I saw the most recent sale for the aluminium Adorama one for $700. That is half the price, so a little strange to compare these, but I'm going to go ahead anyway. The LCD-2 has more forward mids, in my opinion, than the ZMF Eikon, which I believe has far more micro detail. The Eikon has a certain treble jump at 5K, which makes the acoustic guitar twangs sound a lot more realistic on it. It has a slight bit of airiness in that nature as well, but the main difference that you will hear is that it doesn't have quite as much mid bass as the LCD-2, but the sub bass dives deep, and it is very, very controlled. It's very clean. Overall, if I'm listening to the LCD-2 and I'm listening to the ZMF Eikon, even though I can't put it into numbers for you, I do believe that the ZMF Eikon is a cleaner sounding headphone with far less distortion. It's also not veiled like the LCD-2. It's a very dynamic sound, akin to, like, let's say the Focal Utopia, which I praise for having a very dynamic sound as well. Well, the ZMF Eikon is quite like that as well. The ZMF Eikon, it can get a little shrill apparently to some people because of that 5K peak, depending on your preferences and how you hear things. Whereas the LCD-2 is more comfortably rolled off in the treble, but that does give the ZMF Eikon far more of an awake sound, more alert sound. I wouldn't say that these are very similar headphones, even though they both have a slightly bassy but a little bit warm in the mid-range nature. I do believe the Eikon to be more of a reference headphone compared to the LCD-2, which is just for fun listening. So, to end it all, comfort issues aside, the LCD-2 does so much right at its price range that it's hard not to recommend to those seeking a warm and relaxed tone in their audio. Once again, I have not heard the previous iterations, so I can't comment on the differences all that much, but I really do feel that this version strikes the right balance between warmth and sparkle while maintaining a rich mid-range. It's a distinguished sound, not offering heaps of technical brilliance nor magnified micro detail, but rather an effective zone-out tool that just allows you to listen to music. And in this hobby, quite often I see people who listen to gear more than music. This is not the headphone for that. This is the headphone for just chilling out and listening to your music. So thank you very much for checking out my review, and I will see you next time. Cheers.